All right, so there was a bunch of things been bothering me recently, and I've been just trying to put them together in some sort of cohesive form so we can think about them. And if you have a whole bunch of things that seem really kind of crazy, don't make sense, then you try to okay, what's the common theme here, and how do we go about it? So that's what I've been doing, and it has to do with how multiple columns work together in the cortex. So it's really, I'm focusing on the biology here, not necessarily Monty, but some of these themes will be important for Monty, I suppose. So this slide is just a review of the things we do know. We learned a lot about how columns work. We know how a column models static objects. We've shown how the same basic column can model dynamic behaviors. Those little figures, the ones that Vivian came up with for the modeling behaviors document. We've also learned how two columns who are co-located, meaning looking at the same point in space, can model compositional objects. The parent passes down, well, the child says at this location, here's the child ID, and the parent says at this location, you should be seeing this child object at this location. So that's all good. I assume there's no questions about that, but if there are, speak up. Why is my screen not progressing? Okay, so here's some things we don't understand yet. So when it comes to a single column, we know how it can represent behavior models, but we really haven't figured out how it can learn a behavior model. It just doesn't have time to go around and sample all the points, which we could do in a static object. It just doesn't seem possible that a single column can learn behaviors, yet we know how it could represent behaviors. So it just suggests somehow that multiple columns are active in participating in learning. Somehow you can't learn this with one column like you could a morphological object. So that's an unresolved problem unless someone knows a solution to that. There's another problem which has been bothering me for a long time, in that that's the second picture here. The 1,000 brains theory says that all columns learn complete models. So a region has a whole bunch of models that are complete in some sense. But is it really reasonable to expect every column to train on every location on every object? We can imagine doing that with a single column. You're moving over the entire object as you build up a model, as we do today in Monty. But can we really expect that to happen to all columns in a region and multiple regions? And so it's never felt reasonable to me, although technically it could be done. Then again, now when we add learning behaviors, we know that there's a problem. But even just the idea that every column has to have the same model, it suggests there's something else going on, that somehow learning has to be shared among columns. It doesn't seem like we can expect every part of your skin to touch every part of every object, So something's happening there. And then there's been simple observations about learning which suggest it involves the hippocampus. For one, is when we learn new models, we do it very quickly. If I stick my hand in a black box and I feel an object, it doesn't take a lot of repetitions. I can do that very quickly. So there's a fast memory is involved, which suggests the place we know that fast memory exists is the hippocampus. Another thing is that learning new models is always multimodal. So if I stick my finger in the box, I'm feeling an object for the first time, I can visualize what it looks like while I'm touching it. In fact, it's almost automatic. It's hard not to do that. It's somehow it's not like my visual system is clueless what my hand is doing. And I can learn an object by touching it and then later recognize the object by looking at them. So how does that happen? Right? And another one is a little bit more subtle, less obvious perhaps, is that when we learn new models, it's always associated with some sort of episodic memory. So if I were to do a little test and we're all going to stick our finger in the black box and we're going to learn some objects and so on, you'll have a memory of that, at least an episodic memory of that. And it may not last forever, but you'll have a memory of it. So you'll say, yeah, we did this on this time of the day. And then you might even remember, you would almost certainly remember even, you know, when you were learning, say, trying to touch a new object, you would remember how you touched it, where you started, or where your confusion was. At least you'd have that for some short period of time. So you have episodic memories of sort of learning events, which again, these are all suggesting that the hippocampus plays an important role here. So this suggests that learning new models at least involves the hippocampus, and at least starts there, or it involves it if it's happening multiple places. And so when you try to think about that, there's lots of questions that come up. How could this be, and so on. So
and maybe with starts, I guess to clarify, you mean kind of like happens there
yes, that's
fastest,
right.
but not necessarily precedes, or not necessarily has to precede other
Well,
learning.
I don't know. I'm not sure about that. I've been trying
Okay.
to think of situations where I'm learning something new. Like it could be anything: a new word, a new cup, a new, you know, an arrangement of plates on the dinner table, cars at the intersection. It's hard to imagine that occurring without forming some sort of episodic memory.
Sure, but I guess I just mean like that would happen in parallel, because for someone
Well,
like HM who just happens
yeah, but
not to have a hippocampus with enough repetition, he can still learn.
with enough
Um,
repetition, he could learn some things, but not many things, right? He had a very limited ability, and it took lots of repetition. So it wasn't like, oh, he could learn new words, he can learn new, you know, stuff. He just doesn't remember that he learned it. He had trouble learning anything, and then I believe they found that he could learn a few things, and some things were learned, but it was pretty minimal, unless you might have better information than me on that, Niels.
no, I mean I don't know about stuff like if they tried showing him like a word every day, if that was
Well,
even tried,
he,
if he would
he would
pick that
meet
up.
the same people every day, and he wouldn't remember them from day to day.
Yeah,
He met the same people for years. He didn't remember them.
right.
Every time they walked in the room, it'd be like, "Oh, who are you?" You know, so he had a really bad deficit. I think it was more like, I'd have to go back and look at the research, but it was more like, "Oh, look, we found something he did remember." You know, it's like, look at this. But he just really was stuck. You know, that was for many years. They thought he didn't learn anything, and then they found a few things he could learn. So I'm going to go with the assumption that, you know, even HM was basically without hippocampus, you really can't learn stuff. And there might be some, you know, exceptions and so on, but I'm going to go with that.
Interesting. Okay, but so that
Anyway,
is quite different from uh in the past, I feel.
in the past of our thinking, or the past of other
Yeah.
people's.
Oh, yeah. How you've often described. Uh,
Right. Well, everything that we've described, I don't think is wrong. In fact, obviously, models have to be learned in other parts of the cortex, right? Models have to be learned in V1 and V2. All I'm saying right here is that it seems that hippocampus is involved. You can't, it's like, you know, and by the way, I think all three of these problems on this page are related. So this is a set of just sort of observations, that things that don't make sense to me. It doesn't throw away anything about how we assume models are learned in a cortical column. It just says, hey, that's not the complete picture. There's other stuff going on that doesn't quite fit right. But I'm glad you engaged
yeah, I
in that.
guess. Yeah,
I
I
like
mean, I feel
it.
like maybe it'd be interesting to discuss more after the next slide, because but I feel like it feels like learning almost has to happen at the same time in the columns, or as in like
I
it
didn't say it
would.
didn't. I didn't say it didn't happen at the same time. I just said that
Okay.
hippocampus has to be involved. That hippocampus is participating in, and I say new models, not reinforcing existing models necessarily, but learning something new, like a new thing you've never observed before, a new
Yeah.
arrangement, right? So, and I'm not saying learning, you can't reinforce existing models without the hippocampus. I think you can. But I'm just trying to think like, okay, I'm going to give you a new word, a new this, a new mug, you know.
Right.
the first time you see a mug with the logo on it, it gets your attention. You look at it and go, oh, that's new. You kind of remember. And if I asked you later in the day, did you see a new mug today? You go, oh yeah, I did. I was at my, Neil's desk, and I looked at it, I saw he had this interesting mug. So I'd have this episodic memory of it.
Yeah.
It's not like I said, oh yeah, I learned a new mug, but I have no idea where it was. No. But then your episodic memory goes away at some point, and you might still have a model of the mug. So I don't remember the first time I saw a mug with the logo on it, with the Memento logo initially. I don't remember that, but I do remember the mug. So it's like the episodic memory fades, but the model persists.
Yeah. I guess I just mean that, like, as in with like Hebbian updates, like you can imagine that each column, like if we're attending to something, there are neurons becoming coactive together. So there's a reasonable chance that they're going to like adjust themselves a bit. And that's where kind of over sufficiently long time scales, you could imagine, like, I guess I'm just, that's why I'm saying maybe after the next slide, because you were going to talk maybe more about like replay and sleep.
Yeah, right.
But
right,
I feel,
right.
but that like, even without sleep and replay, like that, maybe that's helpful, but not necessarily entirely necessary for learning.
Right, that's quite possible. In fact, I can't imagine a scenario where I learn something new for the first time that the hippocampus isn't involved. I just can't come. I tried to think of examples. I couldn't think of one. Maybe that's because my hippocampus didn't remember it, but I'm just trying to imagine new things.
Yeah, or at least not like structured knowledge. Like, yeah, maybe some motor reflex or something.
Right. I'm talking about the kind of models that we're talking about, like models of behaviors and models of morphology. Right. Those kind of models.
Yeah, no, I agree.
We're talking about cortical columns. So, clearly models have to be learned in all these cortical columns throughout the hierarchy. All I'm pointing out here, and the learning is what we've talked about. There has to be repetition of exposure to features at locations, and our standard methods here. But somehow that's not the only thing that's going on, and it doesn't seem to be sufficient by my my second point on this slide, which is like we don't seem to be able to train all of the columns on all the models and all the locations just by experience. It just doesn't seem like I have enough experience. I don't have enough time to do that. I just don't seem to be able to expose every how in this multimodal learning. Like, how do I once if I've only learned something in one modality, but I'm able to recognize it in another? How is that?
Right, and also how fast it is. Like, that seems hard to imagine anywhere, but in the hippocampus.
Right. So there's some holes here, not in the theory of the column necessarily, but in the sort of our understanding of how hierarchy works, or multiple columns interacting together work. So these things were weighing heavily on me for a long time, and it got worse more recently when we started thinking about behavioral models, because that was like so clear that a single column can't seem to learn behavior models. How could it possibly do that? It's just not able to look at everything. So what's going on? So that was maybe the genesis of this, thinking like it must involve multiple columns observing the object at once, and somehow knowledge of the behavioral learning has to be shared among columns. Like, not all columns can experience everything, therefore but if they know everything, they have to be shared somehow. Anyway, that's got me thinking about this, and then many of these items were stuff I've noodled on for years, but I tried taking it seriously, and I said, let's see if I can make some progress on this. I don't have an answer. Yeah, go ahead.
Naive question here about what does the circuitry look like for the hippocampus? How it's connected to, like, is it just like the neocortex connected to the thalamus, and is it getting the same sensory input?
I don't think it does get input directly from the thalamus. I think unless someone else knows otherwise. We've talked about cortical columns all getting sensory input, and that's true from V1 and V2, but I don't think it's true for higher up regions, and it's not true for the hippocampus. So that's a good observation, Rami, that that's sort of we never really addressed that issue. What's the
And
equivalent?
the hippocampus is connected hierarchically, exactly like, you know, V2 is connected to V1.
Well,
like the same.
it's connected hierarchically as it's shown in the Van Essen diagrams, Feldman Van Essen diagrams, as I've shown it here. The actual connections are, nothing is clean in the brain.
Mhm.
And of course, the hippocampus has a different structure than the cortex. It's got the, you know, the hippocampal complex has got the entorhinal cortex and subiculum and the hippocampus proper. I didn't spell that out here. It has, you know, the architecture is reminiscent of cortical architecture, but it's different. So if you recall, one theory, what has been posited, which I kind of like, is that the hippocampus and the entorhinal cortex are sort of separate organs, but they folded on top of one another. So the hippocampus is sort of folding. It's like a sheet. So try to imagine a sheet of cortex. When it gets to the edge of the sheet, you're at the edge of the sheet, then it starts getting different looking. And like the entorhinal cortex is a 3-layer structure. And then after that is the hippocampus, which is another 3-layer structure. But the hippocampus is physically folded on top of the entorhinal cortex, like the edge of the sheet is bent over on top of each other. And there's connections between hippocampus and the entorhinal cortex. And one theory was that basic folding of a 3-layer structure on top of another 3-layer structure led to the evolution of the cortical column. And so it's very different, but it has some similarities to cortex. But it's not clean. It's not like prototypical cortex at all. It's kind of messy. But it is connected in a generic sense, like I've shown here. If you look at the Feldman Van Essen diagrams, they show the top box in their hierarchy as the HC. You know, it's just a block diagram, you know, not showing what the details are.
Yeah, and I could, you know, but I think often the entorhinal cortex, as well as what's it called, LEC, I'm just trying to look up online and see if there's a good diagram, are kind of in sort of intermediary areas for the rest of the cortex.
What do you mean by that?
So as in, I think a lot of the cortex doesn't connect directly to the hippocampus, but connects to those entorhinal cortex and LEC. I think LEC in particular gets a lot of like sensory and association area inputs and stuff. So that's often considered like the what of like what's being encoded.
So you're saying there's a lot of convergence on the LEC? Is that what you're saying, from a lot of different regions?
I think so. Yeah, that's at least what these diagrams seem to be suggesting as well.
Yeah, there has to be convergence somewhere, because, you know, you have these separate sensory regions that all funnel down into one entorhinal cortex and, you know, and one hippocampus. And of course, some of the higher regions, there's a lot of convergence in these higher regions as well. Right. So that is suggested in this little toy diagram.
Right. Yeah. So, yeah, exactly. So that would be kind of the block just below hippocampus.
Right. Right. So you could have
rather than kind of all to all.
Right. Right. It could have been entorhinal cortex there. I think there's a lot of, you know, weirdness. If you look at these actual Feldman Van Essen diagrams, it's all kinds of regions that are all kind of converging and diverging, and it's messy. But none of that scares us. We just need general principles of how they communicate with each other. But the exception is the entorhinal cortex and hippocampus, because they look different and they perform differently. You know, I have a theory of how the hippocampus, how it's able to learn very rapidly using, you know, silent synapses. And so that's the one place that it's known that have lots of silent synapses, and that's the one place that can learn very quickly that we know. You know, synapses can be grown. They've shown the growth of synapses can occur pretty quickly, but I think the fastest I've ever seen is like, you know, a minute. You know, so that's not enough for, you know, the kind of instantaneous learning we can do with the hippocampus. And that may be rare anyway. Any more discussion on this picture before I jump into a bunch of text trying to resolve how this might work?
No, I just thought I'd mention that. Yeah, I think it may be wrong, but I think in general the consensus view is, yeah, medial entorhinal cortex is where kind of grid cells are and where the what is represented going into the hippocampus, and lateral entorhinal cortex is generally the like what. Sorry, I meant I don't know if I said
Where?
grid cells where, and then lateral entorhinal cortex is what.
Right. So I think what you're saying is there's this general belief that there's these two parallel what and where pathways in the different sensory modalities, and that seems to be preserved in the entorhinal cortex as well.
Yeah.
Right.
Is that like
And
analogous to layer 4 and layer 6 in the cortical column? The what and where? It's like a
no,
landmark.
they're more like
Yeah. Or layer 4 and 6, I guess.
it's the what and where pathways are just two separate regions.
But you're saying within a column, Rami?
Yeah, within a column. So in the you're talking about the hippocampal complex.
I feel like the input, it's kind of like the input from lateral entorhinal cortex is the input to L4. L6 is medial entorhinal cortex, the where for representation, and then L4 is the hippocampus, the actual place cells that are binding the two together.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe.
I was just wondering about the associations between the what and where in the entorhinal cortex, and
yeah,
it would be similar.
But yeah, I feel like the what and where here is more similar to, which I think is what you're getting at, Rami, like the what and where within our columns, rather than the what and where in the ventral versus the dorsal stream.
Oh, I thought it was more like the ventral versus the dorsal stream.
No, not that. No.
I mean, I guess it's similar in that it's like a macroscopic anatomical thing, but the one where it generally isn't kind of about reference frames. I feel it's more
right.
It's more like egocentric versus allocentric.
Right. So I always thought that the two divisions of the entorhinal cortex were more like dorsal and ventral streams. I think that's what most people think. And Rami,
maybe that is what
the where of the layer 6 location and the layer 4 feature, you can think of those as what and where, but I think that's a different what and where. That's just basically saying this feature's at some location, whereas as Niels just said, the what and where pathways are more like egocentric models or allocentric models.
Yeah, in the dorsal and ventral stream, but I do feel like with the hippocampal complex, like the hippocampus is learning like a structured representation of like what is the sensory experience at a location. That feels kind of like what our columns are doing.
Right, but I think the division between medial and the lateral and the medial entorhinal cortex are more like dorsal ventral. I don't think, because they both have grid cells, right? Don't grid cells exist in both the medial?
I'm not sure. I thought they were mostly.
Well, they wouldn't. They wouldn't. Okay, so here's an interesting thought. The classic grid cells representing locations in a rat environment would only be on one side, right? But there would be equivalent grid cells in the same way that you know what I'm saying. It's like that's like a what pathway. Where the classic grid cells are only, you might have grid cells on both sides, but they wouldn't see them unless they knew what to look for, right? Because they're not gonna be modeling the same thing, just like the what and where pathways don't model the same thing. I think we can put this aside for the moment, perhaps.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
I'm not going to suggest anything as detailed as what we're talking about here. I'm going to suggest, or at least propose some things to talk about that are more very large block and tackle ideas. Like, okay, what could be going on here, and in the end, it's consistent with a lot of things people think about the hippocampus already. It's so more like I've gotten there in a different direction, and it seems more clear to me what might be happening. And what I'm about to present, I'm certainly not 100% certain about it all. But at least it's a way I've started thinking about this problem, how it is that columns can learn when they're not exposed to stuff, and how does the hippocampal come into play. Anyone want to discuss any more on this page before I do that?
I guess just maybe to throw out one alternative view on the second problem. I'm not sure I don't think it's as much supported with anatomical evidence, but an alternative to all columns needing to learn all the different models so we can recognize an object with any patch on the skin. An alternative to that could be that the movement information of whatever patch on the skin is currently sensing is somehow broadcast or pooled in a common place that has that model. Because basically, the movement information is kind of universal, and wherever that model exists, even if it is in visual cortex, it should be able to recognize the shape of the object or the object based on shape just from the movement vectors.
No, but you'd have to pair the movement vector with the sense feature at that location, right? So you'd have to broadcast. I mean, I'm agreeing with you. in
Yeah,
terms of-
I guess movement and orientations, maybe.
You'd have to also broadcast the features that detected there, right?
Well, if you learn something with vision and then you're inferring with touch or the other way around, you can't really share the features. I'm just saying, like,
but-
the shape
yeah.
it should be like the morphology of an
Right.
object.
Okay, well, all right, so, yeah, so the orientation, it would be the location and the orientation have to be broadcast,
Yeah.
right? I
Either
agree.
broadcast or like learning associations between like movement of a patch of skin and movement of the eye or something.
Well,
or having
right.
like a common place higher up in the hierarchy that kind of gets pulled information of that and has a more multimodal or like general morphology model.
Right, right. These are all things that I thought about too, but, and they're consistent with what I'm about to present, so it's not really an alternate view here. When I
Okay.
say that, I say, learning is shared, in the second thing, it suggests that learning is shared somehow. That means that somehow things are broadcast, right? That's what I mean by that. I think it's the same thing you're saying, that a column
Yeah, I
has
guess what
to-
I'm saying is if we have that, then we wouldn't need like I don't need a model of a cup in my whatever patch my wrist connects to in the neocortex to recognize the cup with my wrist.
Well,
like
you'd
I
have to
don't-
have, you'd have to have a model to recognize it there. I mean,
Not
unless you're
if
passing.
the movement of that patch is broadcast to a different column that
Well,
was
right,
learned in
right.
cup.
Right, well, that's clearly the case, for example, when we like learn an object with touch and then I can ask you to identify it for vision, right? I'm not proposing that the visual columns actually formed a model of the cup. I'm not saying like V1 after I touch an object with my finger in the black box, I don't think V1 has models of it, but somehow I have a visual imagination of it and I'm
Yeah.
able to imagine what it's going to look like.
Yeah.
I guess I'm not disagreeing with anything you said there.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I guess I think yeah, it must be part of the solution, I guess, but yeah, I wouldn't know which connections would actually work for that kind of sharing of information.
Right,
But
that's
yeah,
the
maybe you
problem.
go ahead with your next slide first. and
That's the
see how
problem.
it
You know,
matches.
on the second point, for a while I used to think about, you know, like not all columns are getting information. So, you know, I've shown these blue arrows, those are sort of representing the columns that get information. And the other columns are not getting anything, or they're, you know, they're not, because they're, if it's vision, this is V1, those columns, there's the center surround receptor fields are quiet. And so one thing I thought was like, oh, well, even if V1 training could spread horizontally within V1, so like take the blue arrow on the right, well, the columns next to it are not getting input. And so could it say, oh, I'm learning something, you guys, my neighbors, should learn too? And we talked about a paper once, we looked at this paper where it showed that activity in a column does spread to columns nearby that are not being driven. So I thought about that possibility, there could be this horizontal spread within a region, but it didn't seem sufficient, and it may actually still be happening, but it's not sufficient to deal with all these issues. So there's
Yeah,
just
I wasn't
multiple ways you
even
could
thinking. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying there's multiple possible ways that columns can learn something without being exposed to it.
Yeah, I wasn't even referring to learning. I was just thinking of inference. Like we could do inference in a column that isn't actually getting sensory input, just based on motor information from a different sensor.
Mhm.
But when you'd have to somehow kind of associate the input feature across modality, which is, I guess, where it feels like the hippocampus would be quite good, or some sort of like association area would be quite good. It feels hard to do
it
that in
could be
like primary cortex.
happening, yeah, higher up in the hierarchy or so.
Right.
But yeah, we would have to kind of associate movement and orientation information between
Right. But
whatever is
not
getting
all
input.
features, right? You can't learn.
Yeah, not the features.
Right, I can see the mug with the logo, but I can't feel the logo with the logo.
Yeah.
So. I
But
think
you also need to somehow kind of like, when you feel something like a hard edge, that kind of awakens something visually in you.
Right, right.
And so, and yeah, so, and it feels like an association area, whether that's hippocampus and or others, would be the best place to kind of have that learned.
Right. So this conversations, it's just the kind of conversation I had in my own head, but they're all fuzzy, right? It's, yeah, it has to do this, it has to do that, but how? What the hell's going on? That's what bothered me about it. We need concrete mechanisms here to solve these. All right, well, let me go on to the next slide. The next slide, unfortunately, it's just a bunch of text, but organize them in numbered paragraphs so we can talk about one at a time. And I may want to come back and look at this picture of the hierarchy as we're doing this, or just try to keep this little picture of the bottom left here in your head when we talk about this. And again, I'll say it again, this is not a concrete proposal, but it's got some ideas in it that are interesting. So, and this is all hypothetical. So let's just start with number one. I've already stated this, but I'm just going to state it and say, okay, this is part of the solution. That the hippocampus is always learning. It never really stops. It's always when you're awake, it's getting information. And it's going to play a role in learning all new compositional models. That anytime you're learning new structure in the world, the hippocampus is going to be part of that, at least in the beginning. Then I start at number two here. I kind of have this vision in my head. This paragraph tries to describe this little vision. But you can imagine the world is just things composed of things, right? And these models have varying levels of depth, meaning, some things are hierarchically structured in many layers and some things are shallower. But there's always a limit to our knowledge. There's always a limit to what we've modeled. And there may be more structure out there. There is always more structure out there that we haven't learned to model yet. So, and so there's this sort of boundary to our knowledge, which is like, oh yeah, I've learned all these models of structured things, but perhaps there's new structure built on the previous things I've learned that I haven't learned yet. And so, I'm studying, I'm going to learn those things. So the brain is sort of continually trying to extend its models of the world by forming new compositional structures. And some of these will last and some of them won't. Some of them will be more permanent and some of them will be less permanent. It's just like heavy unlearning type of thing. It's like, oh, I see arrangement of cars in the intersection. I'm going to learn that, but it goes away. It doesn't come again. So I can't learn that particular arrangement of cars. But I see an arrangement of letters in a new word, and that repeats again and again. So I can learn that because it statistically repeats over and over again. So it's just sort of the brain is just trying to continually deepen its hierarchical structure of composition of the things it knows. And it's always forming new compositions and seeing if they stick, seeing if they come and repeat again over and over again. So it's constantly trying to learn. And so the hippocampus, now we'll move on to point number three, unless there's a question on number two. Okay. So I think with this hippocampus is a staging area for attempting to extend its models. This is where you have to be able to build new models here very quickly because you may only be exposed to them briefly. And it's at the top of the hierarchy because presumably everything that's coming in, let me just read it here. It's a staging area to extend models. It's where new compositional arrangements are first learned. And this is important. It's not just for very complex things. It could be new arrangements of simple objects, such as I'm learning a new word and there's letters. And if I see a new word of different arrangement of letters, I will focus on and tend to that. Or a new shape even. but it's also new arrangements of complex objects such as the mug on the logo or cars at an intersection. So it's anytime it sees some new arrangement of anything it's learned before, the hippocampus gets involved and says, oh, I'm going to try to learn this. And it's a staging ground because it's going to try to learn it, but it may not persist. Like the intersection, it may go away, or this is on the table, it may not happen again. So it's like, okay, I'm going to learn this, and let's see if it sticks around for a while. And to understand how we can deal with little objects like letters and big objects like cars, there's going to be an attentional mechanism, and I'm going to talk about attention in a moment. But essentially, the hippocampus is saying, here's a new arrangement of things I haven't seen before. Let's attend to these items one at a time and see if we can learn a new compositional structure. The hippocampus, number 4, is fast. We know that. So it can learn a new arrangement of single presentation. Now, how does it learn a new arrangement? You might think it works like our current columns, like a reference frame with features. And the entorhinal, the grid cells and the place cells sort of reminiscent of that, right? But it's also, we know that the hippocampus forms episodic memories, which are different. We don't assume that's happening in cortical columns. And episodic memories are just, it's a memory of where and when and the order in which things occurred, right? So, so we know that it does that. It records the order in which the features were attended to, not just the location. So if I were putting my finger in the black box and feeling a new shape and trying to learn this new shape with my finger, after I do that, I would remember the order in which I touched that object. I mean, not 100%, but it's not like, oh, I have no memory where my finger was, or, you know, I would have this sort of episodic memory, like, oh, I first felt this, and I felt this, and then I realized it was rotated and things like that. And so what the hippocampus can do, which most cortex can't do, it can recall specific sequences of observations, right? The order in which they were experienced. Where in a current, you know, in a cortical column, that doesn't happen. The order in which things are learned is not important. It's not saved. It's not remembered. It doesn't matter. We use the reference frame to make that so it's the case.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Ron. No, go ahead.
Unless it's a behavior, like a sequence where the order of the sensory input was important to form that sequence.
Right, that's correct. You're right. I wasn't thinking about behaviors. I was thinking
So only for like objects, learning objects, it doesn't matter.
Right. Absolutely right. That's a good point. Right. Well, and it's funny, in the behavior one, it's still a little different than in the hippocampus, because the hippocampus, you know, episodic memories are placed in time and space. So, you know, it goes even beyond just the sequence. It's like, where was I when I did this? What was the, you know, the time of the day, and, you know, these kind of things are stored.
It is kind of interesting to think about, yeah, how like it does feel a little bit like how time is represented is different in hippocampus, and behaviors like a song or like a sequence of movements of something, like they just feel different for whatever that's worth.
Right.
Like it feels like time in the hippocampus feels much more like biographical and kind of like, when did this happen relative to me, and all this kind of stuff. Whereas I guess what we think would be learned in columns feels much more like, oh, this is kind of a pattern that plays out and it repeats or whatever.
Right. The sequence in a column is a high order sequence. It is the structure, right? Where in the hippocampus, I think you said it well, Niels, the hippocampus it's not really representing the structure of things. It's just representing the order in which you did it. It's like, there's nothing in the world that says I should touch an object in this order, but that's the way I did it, so that's what it's going to remember.
So the hippocampus is more egocentric, and the cortical column is more object-centric, or like with respect to the actual structure of the sequence that we're learning, but not really with respect to me. It's not egocentric representation of what happened.
I'm not sure. I don't know. I'd use that word, Ron. I mean, it's more like, it's like a melody is a structure in the world. It is something that exists in the world through time, but the order in which I touch an object is not part of the world. I'm not sure it's egocentric. It's just a history, you know. It's just
Yeah, like
recording
it feels like there's a sense of like when something happened, and of course you can have a episodic memory of a sequence as well, but it feels very different somehow. It's like, oh yeah, that happened at that time. I remember that event. It's like a point in time, which is very different from just like, oh, I'm at this point in the song or whatever. Kind of like you say, Jeff, like that's just an object that exists in the world, or a structure that exists in the world, and you can be at some point in that structure.
Right. It's think about it this way. We all hear melodies. We're all going to learn the same sequence of the melody. No one's going to learn it differently. We're all going to have the exact same, because it's in the world. It's part of it's a real thing in the world, where if each of us were to feel the object with our hand in the black box, we would move our fingers differently, and we would remember how we moved them. But it doesn't really matter. I mean, yours would be different than mine. It's not really part of the world. It's just a memory of what I did. It's not any kind of structure in the world. It's just a history of my behavior.
Right.
All right. Go on the number 5 here. So what was really striking to me was like, how is it that I'm able to learn a new word based on very low level objects like letters, but at the same time I can learn a new phrase based on mid-level objects like words, or I can even learn a whole, you know, a new, I don't know, speech, a sequence of words. It's like, you know, I can append my models. I can add new models at different levels of composition in the world. You know, and so, you know, how is it I'm learning a new model of an intersection about cars and bicycles, and a moment later I'm learning a new shape, which is just a bunch of edges. You know, it's like, so what it feels to me that if the hippocampus is going to be involved in all these things, it has to be a way of narrowing down and saying, let's all talk about this right now, because I'm only interested in this thing. And so this is what attention is. I'm just going to define attention here, at least a part of it. I think I've said this before, so you might have heard me say this, but I think attention, when I first started thinking about attention, I used to think of like, oh, I'm going to attend to part of my retina, you know, part of my visual scene, but I don't think that's right. I think attention is defined as specifying a region of space that we're interested in. It's a region in real space out there, you know. And I don't know how this is specified, but this feels like what it is. It's like I attend to something. It's not like just restrict what's coming in the parts of my retina. It's more like there's a location in space relative to my body, and that's what we're attending to. And any column that is getting input from that space, I'm interested in. And if a column's not getting it from that space, I'm not interested in it. It's like, and I don't care if that column's a visual column or a touch column or an auditory column. It's like anybody who's sensing in that space, that you can think of some volume out there or some area on an object, is what we're attending to. That's the definition of attention. It's saying only columns that are sensing within that region get to vote, meaning the other columns may be getting input, but they don't get to vote. We're only going to vote on the things that are being attended to. And this relates very much to what you're working on, Rami, about, you know, figuring out where the child objects are in a compositional structure. And I'm not going to suggest your work and how to modify it yet, but I'm just pointing, I think this is what's going on in the brain. And so there's always this idea of attention that, you know, if you're sensing the world, and I don't know where who's in charge of this. I'm not saying it's the hippocampus or someone else, but usually you would think it's in something that was unexpected, that is something that was someplace that we didn't expect to see it. That's what we're going to attend to, because that's an area that I could learn, where there is an unexpected arrangement or unexpected item. And I don't know who specifies that. If the hippocampus or columns can do it, I don't know. But let's accept the fact, I like you to accept the fact that somebody has to find a region of interest, and that region of interest is defined in space, and that anybody can, any kind of column that can get input from that space is valuable. If I define the region of space off to the left of my gaze, my eyes might move to attend to that region, so I have more columns in that region of attention. Or if I felt something unusual on the back of my hand, I might rotate my hand around to feel it with my finger, so that so I get, put my hand on this table I'm sitting at, and the back of my hand felt something a little unusual. I might turn my hand over and look at it, and so I might be, by attending to some space on this table, I'm moving my eyes there and my fingers there, and so all the input I can get coming from that region is useful. And what ends up getting to the hippocampus, since we've restricted all inference to be what's in that region, we're not going to infer anything else that's not in that region. That is what's going to rise to the top of the hierarchy. And the input to the hippocampus is the largest object recognized within the attended region. If in the attended region we do not recognize it as a previously learned object, it's somehow the structure is not known and the voting doesn't reach a consensus, then the attended region will narrow down until we do recognize something. So maybe I don't recognize a word, and then I zoom in on the letters, and then I see one of these letters is a letter I've never seen before, then I can zoom in on the features of the letter. Or if I'm in an intersection, I'm looking at the different cars, and all of a sudden one of the cars is unusual. I attend to that, and it doesn't match. I don't recognize it as a car, something else there. So then I would zoom in on and say, oh, it's a three-wheeled vehicle, or, I would keep narrowing down my attention until I find something I do recognize and start learning structure again. So let me just walk through this again. You're the hippocampus. We're trying to learn new structure. Somebody, me or somebody else, has defined something which doesn't fit within a model. We all then, the whole cortex, including the hippocampus, says, okay, let's attend to that region and see what's there. And if I recognize it, then I say, okay, that's a new item in some location in a reference frame. Or if I don't recognize it, we zoom even further down and say, okay, that's not a recognizable object. Let's go even deeper until we find something we recognize, and then we can start building up compositional structure again. And there's a lot in that.
Yeah, no, I like that though. The idea of attention kind of narrowing with that as a heuristic.
I think that's what we do. Yeah, I observe myself doing this, So, yeah.
I have a question because a counter example to this, specifically to the phrase region of space, comes to mind. Is if I'm listening to you, closing my eyes and looking away, I am attending to, like, how does listening to a podcast while you're doing a whole bunch of other things, how does attending to a podcast or audio, like, that doesn't seem to fit specifically the phrase a region of space.
Yeah, you're right. Absolutely right, Tristan. And I don't know.
I mean, normally doesn't it actually? Like, I think that's what, like, the cocktail party problem is.
Well,
kind of
you
about
could
that. Like,
you could
like
focus on a region of space where the input's coming from, but
and that's why it's difficult for people with hearing aids, for example, to they struggle a lot with parties and crowds of people. Because it's harder to localize sound,
right.
and so like they just can't really attend to it in the same way. It feels like if anything that's in headphones, like you're probably just attending to like your head kind of, and because there's no other sound going on.
But this seems more about like
simple.
attending to something in conceptual space versus like having trouble actually getting the auditory input. Like where
well, because I guess there is no issue with getting auditory input, but I mean, I don't know about you guys, but if I'm multitasking and I'm sufficiently focused on something in front of me, then whatever I'm hearing, I will stop hearing, like at any significant level. So again, it feels like you can't attend away from it.
I think there's two things we're talking about here. I mean, maybe Vivian just touched on it. One is, Niels, you rank a great point. We do when we're listening, we attend to some point in space. And we're trying to restrict input from that space, that point. So that's correct. I think that's a good, but I think there's this other issue, which is there can be another problem. Let's say often when I'm listening to like a podcast or something, and I'm listening to it really fast. And then I couldn't understand something someone said, right? So then I back up and I slow it down and I listen to it again. And maybe even then it's too fast. And then back up, I slow it down even further until I get to hear what they said. I think that's a different type of, I think that's more what Tristan was talking about. I don't know, but or maybe Vivian was talking about. It's like there was a series of patterns which didn't fit in my models of patterns, of temporal patterns. It's not a spatial pattern, it's a temporal pattern, but it didn't fit. It was a model that didn't work. It didn't sound like a word I knew or a phrase I knew. And so I had to go back and then attend to the components of it slowly to make sure that I did understand it. Or maybe I learned something new, something like that.
I feel like both of those are still about the sensory input and getting the right sensory input. But at least what I was thinking of when Tristan brought this up was like actually being in conceptual space. Like if I'm driving and listening to a podcast, I feel like I'm not even, like obviously I'm paying enough attention to drive, but my brain isn't really registering it. I'm not really remembering what I'm seeing. My brain is like having a bunch of mental imagery and moving through conceptual space of what the person is talking about in the podcast. Like the words themselves elicit like a space in my head that I'm moving through and imagining and paying attention to.
Right. I see what you're saying. Okay, so that makes a lot of sense. I guess what the point there is we don't really have a good understanding of conceptual space yet. We talk about it a lot. It's going to be based on grid cells, but we don't really have a deep understanding of what it is. But if we accept that it exists, then I see your point. Then right, we could have a mismatch in conceptual space.
There's the example of also two people talking at the same time, and it feels like I could filter, like I could actively switch between one or the other, and basically pay attention to one and completely disregard everything the other one's saying. And it's really, there's no location there, but it's more that it feels more like model-based attention, or like I want to listen to something and I'm basically not attending to everything else that's happening at the same time.
Maybe I could to a cheat here. So Vivian brought up conceptual space, which we talk about a lot, and we don't really understand deeply, but we say it's going to work. It's going to be built on grid cells. My argument here that we specifying a region of space could include conceptual space. I think that's what Vivian was suggesting. But I can't really think about it too clearly. It's much easier for me to think about physical space. So that's how I'm thinking about it right now. But if it should apply to conceptual spaces too. I think that's Vivian's point. So even if we don't understand it completely right now, it's okay. We can go forward and keep focusing on physical space because in theory, whatever we do physical space will work for conceptual space.
So I'm trying to think about something you want to attend to that is itself moving around in space. So like, a dog walks into your apartment or something. You're going to continue attending to where that dog is in your physical space. So, something is informing that. So something is helping you update the location in space that you want to attend to. And it's still sort of spatially bound to begin with, right? I mean, because the animal is still moving around in your house. But
I don't think these are counterexamples. I mean, the dog walks in your house. Maybe you weren't expecting that. That's like a car showing up at an intersection, right? And you can attend to it. You may not attend to it forever because eventually you just give up and then you start going back to work and you don't remember. You're not attending to the dog and you don't see where it goes, right? But I think the dog walking into your house is very similar to a car at an intersection. It's
I guess
it may or may not repeat it. Maybe the dog walks in the house every day using the same pattern, then you can learn that as a behavior. It might be just sort of random and you can't learn it,
So I'm just thinking about what is it that initializes that location and space that we want to attend to? What is it that defines that? Is it just like a
something
model-free
unexpected.
sort of stimulus,
Yeah, it feels like
basically?
a model free and a mixture of model free and model based. Like as soon as anything is moving in your apartment, probably you get model free attention, but then you recognize it's a dog, and then you're like, oh, that's kind of
Not
weird.
necessarily.
I'm gonna pay attention to that.
There might be something moving in my apartment all the time, and it's always there, and I don't notice it anymore.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
but then that would probably be model based, like
Right.
vision.
So
I'm just saying it's probably a mixture, but like it almost always has to start with some amount of model free.
I think when we say model
I mean,
free,
you can,
I would say
yeah.
a model. My model doesn't predict it. So you could call that model free, or you could say, I could say, look, I could learn my dog walks in the door every time I pick up my coffee cup, and he goes and sits down in the corner, right? And at some point, I'll stop noticing that because it becomes the learned behavior. It's just, it's just like I can give examples of things like that. So is it model free? It's basically, it's outside of an existing model, but it could become part of a model. How about phrasing it that way? It's not purely, you could think of it different ways. You could say like something unexpected happened, but it's only unexpected because it wasn't incorporated in a model. Remember the example sometimes they use, the kids in a classroom and the teacher says, focus on the board, and then someone opens the door on the side of the room and everybody turns their head to it, right? Well, if that door opened all the time in a persistent way, people would stop turning their head to it. So it's not purely model free. It's like, it's unexpected in my current models, but it could become part of a model if it was repeated consistently. It would suggest that it's not completely based on, outside of models. It's like it can become part of a model and then I won't notice it anymore. Maybe.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think Niels is having headphone issues, so.
Oh, is he? Niels, can you hear us? No. I've got all my people turned off here.
Yeah, I guess in terms of conceptual space, coming back to that while we're waiting on Niels, it almost seems like it's also using the same kind of hippocampus mechanism of quickly laying down points. Like if I'm listening to someone talk about Monty and sensor modules and learning modules and how they connect, it's like I'm forming a quick model of like putting these things in a relative arrangement, connecting them with lines or something in my head, and then I can also focus my attention on different parts of that kind of conceptual space, even though like learning modules and sensor modules are not really something that physically exists or that I've ever sensed with my sensors.
Yeah.
But still, like conceptually, I'm putting them in some kind of space and then attending to different elements as you talk about them or describe them.
Right. And you typically have an episodic memory of that sequence of thoughts.
Yeah.
Right. Just like we'll say, oh, what didn't we just talk about this a minute ago? We were bringing up this, or Rami said something, whatever.
Yeah, actually, like when you listen to stuff while driving or walking somewhere, sometimes you associate the information with the place you were at when you heard about it. And you go back to that place, you're like, oh, this is where we talked about that. Or
that is true. That I see it all the time when I can't remember faces, as you know, or names, but if I see the person in the right context, the name will come to me, right? But if I see the image out of that context, I just don't get it.
Yeah, I guess clearly the hippocampus has evolved to specialize in remembering like environments and where we are in an environment, which is, I think, the whole concept of a memory palace. That it's much easier to remember large amounts of information if you kind of place them in a hypothetical physical space rather than
Right.
just like.
But it's interesting here, though. It's funny because I think about the hippocampus. neural tissue, neural tissue doesn't know anything, right? So it's like, it's just dealing with locations and regions, and it doesn't know if those are physical spaces or if those conceptual spaces. If it's just grid cells, it doesn't know that. So it seems like the mechanism should work sort of universally.
I'm just guessing that if I had to guess, like when you're learning something in conceptual space, the grid cells in your entorhinal cortex aren't moving that much. And so
Right.
there's more kind of interference. Whereas
Yeah.
if you're moving through physical space or even like mental or like a virtual or mental physical space, like an environment or like a memory palace, then the grid cell code is going to be more distinct when you're laying down
Right,
information
right,
and there's like less
right.
interference or something like that.
Right. Okay, maybe we should just try to keep going here. I think that's a good observation. So I'm trying to paint this picture in your head of the hippocampus is basically somebody saying, there's things here we don't anticipate. Let's attend to them. And the hippocampus laying down a memory of these observations. Now, those episodic memories we were just talking about, they are located in some place. I remember where I saw this thing, or what letter in the new word, what letter was the first letter, the second letter, the third letter, and so on. So point number 6 says, while we're awake, the hippocampus learns these episodic memories. And an episodic memory, briefly, is a sequence of attended spatial regions and the objects that were observed in those spatial regions. So that's what we were just describing in the previous point. You're just attending to regions in space, whether it's conceptual space or physical space, we'll leave that out, but same idea. But imagine physical space, it's a little bit easier. So you're imagining you're attending these things in space and in the order in which you observed them and what was observed at each location. That's what the episodic memory is. It's just recall of what you did and what you observed. Now, the next part is, it's well-known believed theory, but I don't know any of the details of it. Number 7, it's certainly, we know that during sleep, memory consolidation occurs, that if you don't get the right sleep, you don't remember things. So there's a lot of research about this, how during sleep, your memories are consolidated, whatever that means. So, and there's also a lot of evidence that some of these episodic memories are replayed during sleep cycles. And I think sometimes they're replayed very quickly, if I recall. They're not replayed in real time. They're replayed very rapidly. But they can see the neurons recalling sequences of events of the episodic memories in a rat, for example, what the rat did very rapidly. Now, during sleep, we can say that no columns are getting sensory input. We're going to say that's the rule. They're not going to get sensory input. And as the episodic memories are replayed, somehow the hippocampus could enforce the region and object pairing that these are the sequences that were learned in the episodic memory. It could enforce that over all cortical columns. And I have a lot of questions. I don't understand this, but the idea would be like, okay, let's replay this thing I heard. I'm going to broadcast it to everybody. Everybody, you're all going to pretend you're attending to this region, and you're all going to pretend you observe some object. Now, some cortical columns won't make any sense to them, but some columns it would make sense to them. But you're basically telling everybody, let's all do the same thing. We're all going to relearn what I just did earlier. You're going to be exposed to this. And I don't know how often this occurs, how rapidly I know it happens rapidly. I don't know if it repeats over and over again, but this is a means by which the model, the cortical columns and their models could learn models that they never directly experienced. We're just telling them, you're not getting sensory input. I'm telling you, pretend you're looking at this region, this space, and pretend you saw this, and now you're looking at this region and you saw this, and you saw this. This is the first time I've ever had a sense for how we could form memories over broad areas of the cortex that never actually experience the behavior directly or the input directly. It's not inconsistent with existing hippocampal literature, but it's a bit more detailed and specific, and it makes more sense in this concept.
Yeah, I like if we can get this to work as like a as a way. And one thing I like is because and maybe Jeff, like I think there's a fair amount of computational theories out there about the role for dreaming and kind of hippocampal replay, that it's like, but it's focused a lot on kind of how neural networks and deep learning relies on this kind of independent and identically sampled distribution. And so like dreaming is maybe like a way of kind of like randomly sampling from almost like an infinite buffer of experience so that you don't have catastrophic forgetting and stuff like that.
It's
But
just
that-
interesting because I'm not aware of this
Okay,
work, but it seems to be the opposite of what I'm suggesting.
Yeah,
And
well, so
right, you
yeah,
don't
so
want IDD stuff here. You want it to be, you want to do the exact detail of learning. You know?
yeah, or at least yeah, but that like it doesn't actually work as a solution to like, unless you do literally sample from like an infinite distribution and stuff like that. And it doesn't explain how does online learning happen like during the day. Like you don't have to
Yeah.
sleep in order to learn something. You can learn something during the day and then you just remember it better after sleeping. This feels much closer to kind of reality, which is like the solution to continual learning and all that stuff isn't going to lie in hippocampal replay or stable learning or whatever. It's going to, like, this is just a way of, as you say, kind of columns which take a while to learn or maybe didn't get the full sensory input can kind of be a bit more exposed.
Right. I mean, we don't have the problem that biology has, which is, learning is slow in synapses. So, Monty we can do quick learning, but it does suggest a way that when learning, we could be training lots of columns that are not getting input at this point in time. I've even asked the question, well, what if I'm awake? Okay. What if I'm awake? Could this mechanism still be at play in the following way? When I'm awake, some of the columns are getting direct input, either from sensors or from other columns, and they're being driven by sensory data. But other columns are not. And could this, and the intention mechanism is working, right? So let's say the cortex, or let's say the hippocampus is saying, we're attending to this, we're attending to this. Could it be that this same broadcast mechanism works while you're awake on the columns that aren't actually being driven by anything? So you often notice that when I'm talking to this group, I'm listening to someone else speak, I often close my eyes. I feel bad about it because it's sort of rude. But I do that, it helps me think. And it's maybe a way of saying, like, let's turn off the input to a bunch of my cortex so that it can be involved in this, invoked as part of this attentional mechanism. I could be training things in my visual cortex because I'm not looking at anything right now. Something along those lines. My point is, I've described something here that would work during sleep, but Monty doesn't need to sleep. Monty doesn't need to, it can learn quickly. But it's also, the basic sharing could occur during wake periods too, but it wouldn't be for the entire cortex. It's only for parts of the cortex that maybe aren't receiving anything at this point in time. So I don't know about
more for inference then, like to generalize inference.
No, it would be more just learning. It's like well, again, imagine I put my finger in the black box and I'm feeling an object. In some sense, I sort of visualize what I'm feeling. I kind of have an image in my head of what it looks like as I'm touching it. And so it could be that I'm actually training my visual cortex. Imagine my visual cortex has no input coming in, and then, or I'm not attending to it. And so I'm attending to a region in space, but potentially I could be training my visual cortex on that same thing right at that moment from a sort of top-down mechanism. obviously I can only train it on the morphology, but all I'm pointing out, this mechanism I propose that somehow works during sleep might also be partially operating during awake periods too. That's all I'm saying. The training mechanism.
Do you know what kind of connectivity people propose to be used for the replay?
No, I know nothing about it. All I know is that I think they look at either grid cells or place cells, and they see a sequence of patterns that they know was experienced by the animal earlier.
Yeah, and
I
then
don't-
again, it could be wrong, but I think from what I was reminding myself of earlier, any like reactivation of cortex would probably happen by a lateral entorhinal cortex and medial entorhinal cortex,
Projecting back the cortex.
projecting back to cortex.
Right, right.
That's kind of like the way station.
I don't, it's like this idea suggests that there needs to be a broadcast signal that represents a region of space that is the attended region. And this has to be in some sort of universal reference frame that then individual columns can say, I'm in that zone or not, I'm in that region or not. I don't know how that would work. I haven't tried to walk through that at all. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know about the replay stuff, but a big part of sleep, at least during slow wave, if I'm not mistaken, which is distinct, from if we're talking about replay, that's going to have to be something that happens during REM probably, because otherwise the brain's just too synchronized. Is synaptic renormalization. So like most of your synapses strengthen throughout the day, just during waking life. And at some point, you've got to like bring those synapses back down in terms of strength. Otherwise, your brain will just be seizing all the time. So during the idea with sleep is that you take the small handful of synapses that have strengthened the most and you strengthen them, and everything below that threshold gets weakened. So you've got this, mechanism by which the most important things get committed, and everything below that, you just like basically make room for more memories and synapses to get strengthened the next day.
Is this empirical results or these theoretical ideas?
I think it's both.
I mean, the renormalization doesn't make sense to me because I think about synapses for the most part in cortical synapses. They have very little weight. They're binary more than anything else. Either they exist or they don't exist. But the idea that there's any kind of like any degree of fidelity in the weight is really minimal or non-existent. So there's a lot of theories that people speculate about neural networks, including deep learning networks, where they assign synaptic weights to some level of precision, which just doesn't exist in real brains. So the idea that you're renormalizing weights seems kind of odd to me. It doesn't fit my understanding of how synapses really work in the cortex. So that's why I was asking, is this like, proven empirical results, or is this people just,
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll post about it later because it's been a while. I'm seeing that there's some empirical stuff now, but obviously I can't summarize
just
it
so much
in the short term.
I think so much of what people believe about synapses is wrong. And it's by the way, it's confusing too, because if you look at other parts of the brain and other animals, then there really is this strengthening and weakening of synapses. You go like the Aplysia sea snail, right? They can see that. But in cortex, it doesn't look like that. And it looks like, like in Aplysia, all the synapses are there. You don't add them and subtract them. They're just changing their weights a bit. But in Cortex, we know that synapses are forming and unforming all the time, and the whole theory about sparse representations all suggests that synaptic weight is really not an issue. It's not something we need to think about. It's more binary. And so you have to, when we go look at literature on this stuff, you have to be very careful what they're talking about, what animals, what is the paradigm, what is the assumptions they make. Just bear that in mind when you're reading through that stuff. I should just at least mention the last point here. I didn't think about this theory at all in terms of behavioral models. I want to, I didn't have time. So I don't really know, because we have this helps me see a path as a solution of like, oh, all columns can't experience the same thing, but they all need to learn models. So how does that happen? This gives me a path to do that. But it's not clear how it would work for behavior models. And maybe it's easy. I just haven't thought about it. So I just throw that out there. It's like, it's a total void of my thinking right at the moment. But hopefully, if you think about it, maybe this basic mechanism would also suggest how a column can learn complete behavior models, even though it doesn't experience everything. It doesn't jump right out at me, though. So that's something to think about.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, I think
No
it'd be
more
interesting to
ideas.
think through like how the replay actually kind of works in terms of yeah.
I think it's fun. I don't think, I think Monty, we can do all kinds of fun stuff in Monty that doesn't have to work like this at all. I think the idea that you might broadcast or train all columns that aren't currently involved in something, have them all learn the same thing in some sort of, basic form, and using attentional regions could be important. And it could be important for the work that Rami's trying to do now too, as much as I understand it. So I just want to make sure, I don't think we have to go and have, Monty doesn't have to sleep. It doesn't have to do anything like that.
Yeah, it can be a bit more like dolphins, maybe. I think they switch
well-
off half their brain at a time, and
That's it.
that half brain sleeps while the other half is awake and learns.
Well, that's interesting. I remember reading that now, yeah. That's pretty funny. Does that mean, I don't know what that means.
So Monty can kind of asynchronously
Right,
sleep.
but we can do whatever we want,
Yeah,
Monty can,
we just
we can
copy
train-
models over. Yeah,
yeah, we might copy models, and Monty could do this stuff in 100 milliseconds and get back to the main event. I don't know.
Right.
But I've always felt never had a comfortable feeling about how can we train models without them experiencing something. And yes, we can copy it, but I wanted to understand how brains do this, and that can help us think about it. And unless it works across modalities, as Vivian was saying earlier, obviously I can't learn complete models across modalities, but I can learn morphology models across modalities. So maybe, that's something to think about too.
Yeah, and then one, for what it's worth, I was just looking now at like V1, at least from some quick Googling, both MEC and LEC have pretty minimal projections to there. I mean, they exist, but it's like 0.5% of the projections to LEC and MEC come from to V1, sorry, come from MEC and LEC.
I don't have any projections from entoronic cortex to V1, but that's
What's that?
interesting.
Yeah.
I'm surprised they have any, but
I guess, yeah, because I guess presumably we want to sort of like project back and want to reawaken. But anyways, but this, I feel like to me, this suggests maybe that again, this could be a way to help learning, maybe particularly in higher level cortical regions, because I think more higher level cortical regions do get more projections from entorhinal cortex, but that like something like V1, kind of like you've often said in the past, Jeff, like it will learn models, but it just takes a long time, and it doesn't.
Yeah.
Maybe that doesn't need hippocampus, but it just needs a lot of time.
Well, it might need hippocampus, but here's another.
But I guess I guess my suggestion is, how would it even get help from the hippocampus based on that connectivity?
Well, I can imagine, I didn't know if I needed that connectivity. I was thinking more like there's some sort of the cortex, the hippocampal complex has to tell all cortex during the sleep periods that says, okay, here's a region in space. You translate, that into your reference frame somehow. I don't know what that, and here's the basic thing you're supposed to be observing there, and
So is it projecting back to, like,
I'm not sure.
almost like
I'm sure
LGN or
it
like
could be
retina or
something else. It could be, you're right. It could be the reticular formation, or it could. There's a bunch of things that could be playing a role here. I don't know what the mechanism is. I have no idea. I don't think it would be a direct connection from entorhinal cortex to every region. I would think it'd be more global somehow, or it would go through some intermediary somehow. There's a whole bunch of people things that could come into play here to make this happen, because the hippocampal complex is going to be broadcasting sort of egocentric region space, and it has to be converted into, I don't know, models. I haven't even thought through this, but I want to come back to one thing about V1 and V2. Again, I think of the models in the cortex as this sort of these sort of hierarchical compositions, and when something unexpected happens, it can happen at any level in the cortical hierarchy. So if an unusual car shows up at the intersection, like something that doesn't look like a car, that's going to be pretty high up in the cortex, where that, I don't think it's V1, it's going to be saying, hey, there's something wrong here. But if I see, but some things could actually show up in V1, depending on what it is. So my point is, what I'm imagining happens here is that when we're training during this sort of sleep cycle, it's not everybody in the cortex is learning. It almost feels like it would be starting at the hippocampus and going down some levels, and then it's going to stop. This is a very fuzzy idea. Sorry about this. It's going to stop, but sometimes you go a little further. Maybe sometimes it goes all the way to V1, but that's pretty rare. Something down to V1 doesn't make sense. It's like some basic structure in the world is weird. But you can imagine this sort of mass training event. The things they're actually learning are, it starts at the hippocampus replaying stuff, and then it's just sort of dynamically going down as much as it needs to train these regions but because most of the learning will be of complex objects in complex environments. But if it needs to, it keeps going further down, and you tend to smaller and smaller regions of space, and it might get all the way down to V1 and say there's a new letter here. It doesn't make any sense to me. And maybe that letter was on the logo on the side of the car in the intersection. So first you look at the car, then you look at the side of the car, then you look at the logo, then you look at the word, then you look at the letter, and you go, oh shit, what is that little thing there? So it's
kind of like maybe the TikTok logo. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's kind of those two colors where when they're really close to each other, it sort of looks 3D.
Right.
I feel like that's something that maybe V1 would be troubled by.
Right. You look at it in detail, like what's going on there? It's red and green at the same time, Anyway, so these are just fuzzy ideas, but this is not counter what you said about V1. I'm just pointing out that even in the normal learning process, most learning wouldn't affect V1 because the representations of V1 are not incorrect. We only want to change models or extend models where the model isn't sufficient. And so those are mostly be towards the top of the hierarchy. We're learning new arrangements of complex things we haven't seen before. Is mostly what we do, but not always. Sometimes there's new basic little structures that we might learn.
I don't know how to square these two things, but I've got these two things in my head. One is that the hippocampus during this short-term, this like really rapid learning memory, let's say you look at a table, you see plate, fork, mug, cup, things like that. Those are super coarse-grained. Like you're just getting basically category tags for each of those things, like plate, that you're not really learning a super detailed spatial representation.
Why do you say that? I mean, these are known objects, right? Like I'm looking at the things on the table.
Yeah, they're known objects, but I think when you just really quickly learn that arrangement, it seems like you're really learning that that's a cup. Like you're not, unless you really focus on it and try to learn that cup in detail, this really rapid learning seems to be like, I'm just going to learn the coarsest, most general version of this kind of object exists
It
in
feels
that
kind of like
location.
it's some sort of like neural signature that's kind of on a continuum. Because I feel like if then someone was to swap in an object that's similar, like your chance of noticing the discrepancy would probably be proportional to how similar it kind of generally is. Like if someone
Yeah.
puts in something that's technically a cup and you would label a cup, but it's just like a totally different cup, I think there's a reasonable chance you'd notice it. If it's slightly different, who knows? But so it feels kind of a bit like almost like the distance in representational space.
Yeah. Here's another way to look at the same thing you just said. In my house, we set the table every night, and either my wife or I set the table. And we have a set of dishes and set of cups and things. And and I walk in there and I'll say, oh, did Janet put out the spoons or this, whatever, I don't know, whatever. If one of those cups was not one of the 5 glass styles we have in our house, I would notice it right away. I would say, hey, that's not ours. That doesn't belong here, right? If I walked into your house, Niels, and you had something and you had a glass, I wouldn't think twice about it. I don't know what to make of this. My point is, my prediction can vary. I think there's on a scale between like, oh, any cup would do. Maybe Niels likes, these kind.
You'd probably be surprised if it was the exact same cup that you have.
It would be. I would notice it. You're right. I would say, hey, you bought these IKEA too. But it's interesting. It goes back to your point, Scott, about like how detailed it is. I don't understand it. I'm just making an observation that it can be quite detailed, and I'll notice something's wrong, or it could be not if I'm in Neil's house. But I think in the general rule is I would. I don't know the answer. Sometimes it can be quite detailed, and the exact arrangement can change all the time. So it's not like there's a set arrangement has to be every time we sit down at the table.
No, but if you do the same arrangement every night for years, then
I would notice it. Right. There's this scale between things that are repeated accurately and things that are sort of repeated and things that aren't repeated. This is similar to the idea that the cups can look differently, and that they have different basic shapes, but they're all cups. Or my cup, which has a very specific shape, the same basic thing. Anyway, I'm not sure what your original point was, Scott.
Yeah. So I have sort of two.
By the way, before you
trying to figure out how to.
I want to know what your background is because it's very distracting. I keep looking at your background. What is that?
I'll switch it. I don't know. I checked the stock backgrounds last time I was open on Zoom, and I just
I'm also wondering this. Is it meant to be like a scene, like the inside of like a
cardboard
building
box
with shadows or something?
I don't know. It reminds me of Inception when they're like bending the city up and stuff like that. But
yeah, it would be way less disorienting if it didn't have that thing at the bottom where it
Right. Then it looks like you're in a
turns.
box. You're like it's like I'm getting distracted because I'm attending to your background, trying to figure what it is, and then I don't hear you.
Or like a cardboard forest or something.
there we go. Okay.
All right, there we go. There's your home.
Okay. So the idea of sort of tagging locations with the most general like object type for really rapid learning, really rapid picking up of models fits in, I think, nicely with the compositional idea. Like we'll build a compositional object as well as we can, which means tagging locations with IDs essentially. But also, I was thinking about, that's a pretty sparse way to represent a cup if you can manage it, and there's nothing special to learn about it. You've just got an ID at this location for a cup and plate and knife and fork. So it's pretty sparse, which is nice. Then I was kind of thinking about model sharing throughout the rest of the cortex. And it's a lot easier to share model information if it's a really sparse, basic general model. Like, it's a challenge to imagine how really detailed spatial information is going to get relayed between different columns, right?
Let me just stop you for a moment. Imagine the hippocampus has a representation of location, meaning like a region in space, and it's not a point; it's region. It's different, and it also has the ID of the object that was in that thing. That ID could be very specific, or it could be generic. The location could be very specific, or it could be fuzzy. The difficulty of transmitting that to other people is the same. I don't think it gets any harder if the SDR represents a very unique object or the SDR represents a generic object. All I'm doing is, it's not like I'm, remember, all we're doing is specifying objects at locations, and the object ID could unfold into a very detailed object. I'm not trying to pass all the details. Like if it's my cup on the table, then I don't have to say, here's all the facets of the glass. It's just like, no, this is the ID for that glass, and that's it. So I'm pushing back on the idea that transmitting or broadcasting a detailed model, meaning objects that are detailed versus objects that are fuzzy, really doesn't take any more effort. It's just location and ID. It's just,
Well, I guess like storing them seems like it would be similar effort, but I think maybe what you're saying, Scott, is more like, if let's say this is the hippocampus knows it's learned about a new object today, and now I want to transfer that over sleep to other columns. Presumably, like the more points that there are in that model, the more at least time consuming that would be to sort of visit all those locations and share all that information. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah.
right.
It'd be a lot easier to share information, like if it's a cup or a mug or something that I'm trying to share between columns. It'd be a lot easier to do that in a compositional setting where I share vague cylindrical looking thing connected to vague handle looking thing.
Right.
It's
as long as those
Yeah.
columns also know about those kind of
yes.
sub objects or whatever.
Yeah. Again, I'm going to push back on this a little bit. To me, it's, Neil, as you said, look, there could be more points to transmit. Like if I've learned about the mug with the logo, and now the logo has a bend in it. Well, that takes more information. I had to make more observations of the logo. I had to tend to the point where it bent. Otherwise, I can extrapolate between. So yeah, there's a few more observations. The number of observations that has to be transmitted would change, but I think the quality of the observation doesn't change at all. It's still this location ID, same thing. It doesn't matter what the ID is, if it's a fuzzy object or a specific object. So I think the difference between what you call a detailed model and an undetailed model might be the number of points you have to transmit, the number of items that or the number of observations that you made. That would be true.
But yeah, I think your point, Scott, is just that like compositionality enables us to have sparser models, which is good for this. Like in your example, Jeff, of the logo with the mug, or the mug with the logo, if you didn't have a model for the logo, you would have to transfer a model where you had learned all the like colors at specific locations, and that.
Right, but we're not doing that.
Yeah, exactly. It's just so I think we're all in agreement. I think your point, Scott, was that it's nice that we get sparsity from compositionality, and maybe just kind of a reminder to lean into that because it's useful for transferring models.
So and the final point was, sleep as a potential mechanism for helping with the sparsification process / building up of categories. So starting to synthesize information throughout the day, you've seen many kinds of cups. Perhaps that offline period is a period when you start building these sort of general models.
Yeah, but that's not what I'm arguing. That may be true, Scott, but that's not what my point today was. My point was you're not doing some sort of data management here. You're just replaying experiences. That's it. Whatever actually you experience, it's going to be replayed. And the receiving columns that are getting this location and ID information, they can learn what they're going to learn from it. But I don't like the idea of or maybe I just don't understand it, the idea that somehow we're like using this to come up with conceptual things or to massage the data or build different types of models. The mechanism I propose here doesn't do that at all. It just says, I observed some ID at some location. I have a sequence of them. I can play them back and everybody can be told, pretend you're seeing the same thing. It's not doing more than that. Maybe something else is going on more than that, but I'm not proposing that.
Fair enough. Yeah, I was kind of just toying with the idea that the detailed model information is learned to some degree in Cortex, and the hippocampus is the reason why it's a fast memory is because it's not storing that much information. If it's just storing like associations that are, with the detailed information being lodged in Cortex.
Right. But it might be the ID that it's storing could be a very detailed object. I mean, it's just still an SDR. There's no more extra memory involved. It's just, but it could be a detailed object. So it's not like the hippocampus is it never has to all it has to ever do is transmit the IDs of the existing known objects that are children of a new composition. So it's only transmitting IDs of already learned things. And where it was observed in the world. So it could be very detailed, or it can be a super it could be, this is the space shuttle, that's the ID for the space shuttle, or it could be, a letter A. I mean, so I'm just trying to get away from this idea that I keep hearing you saying is that somehow we're trying to solve a information bottleneck problem or something like that. It's not like that at all. I don't think it's just it's a way of getting all the columns to act as if they actually experience this thing directly.
Mm-hmm.
That's all it is. And the information sent is very minimal. It's just ID and location. These are just SDRs.
Can I try to share something that might support Scott's idea? So I just started drawing this. I'm not sure if it's gonna work out. Everybody see the Excalibur?
Yeah.
Okay. So I was making this earlier and then I gave up on it. But so let's say like we have multiple columns and I'm kind of ignoring any of the intermediates. And these three are getting input. So let's say this is like finger one, finger two, and finger three, and we're learning. Let's say finger one is like on the handle. Like we haven't learned a mug about handle of mug, and this F2 is I don't know, body, and this is like the rim or something.
Are we learning the mug for the first time?
Yes.
Okay, so let me just
so
start
it's
off
like
saying,
putting like three figures into a black box, and we're kind of touching around the mug.
okay, so let me stop you right there, because I think you might be heading down a path I think I disagree with.
Okay.
When you're learning, you attend to one region at a time. So I can't learn the mug by putting my hand in there and grasping all the I can infer it this way, but I can't learn it this way. Imagine the mug is
or maybe at a higher level column you could, like, it feels like the column that's kind of almost getting inputs from all of those fingers could say like, oh, I'm sensing like, but then you're kind of attending to a region and there's one thing you're sensing at that region.
Right. The output during learning, the output has to be a single object at some location. And so if the three fingers do not recognize a single object, because I haven't learned this mug before, then I'm going to attend to some region, and maybe only finger two or finger three is the finger that's getting the input in the attended region. So it's not like we can learn all these together. It's like you have to attend to a region at a time. Learning it's always like attend to a region where a single object can be identified. So if finger three is attending to a region that says, oh, I recognize a rim, great. But at that time during learning, the other two guys they're not being used. During inference, they can all vote. But during learning, only one region can be attended to at a time. And if the object can't be recognized within that region, then the region gets smaller. So
Right.
these three
And then
fingers,
like maybe like an example where it doesn't need to get that small is like, I don't know, again, you put your hand into a box and someone's arranged like a board game, and so there's some dice on it or something, and you touch a dice with your 3 fingers and you instantly recognize the dice.
right, so
that isn't, now you're learning that there's a dice at that location, and then you move to a new location. But like you say, Jeff, there's like one object. But if it was like a totally weird thing, then you would start
Like, let's-
feeling it with
let's
one
say you
finger
touch-
or focusing on
right,
one
right.
finger.
But let's say you grabbed it with your 3 fingers and it was like the old shoe in the Monopoly game or something like that, you know, little,
Right.
if you're familiar with that.
I do
You
not get the
wouldn't-
reference, but go ahead.
And well, they used to have these tokens,
fine.
and they used to have these really old ones from like 1800s or something. So they those old with leather shoe, little metal shoe. Anyway, it had a weird shape. So if you touch it with your 3 fingers and you didn't know that thing, it's not like the die where you know it. You'd say, I don't know what this is. And then what you'd have to do, then you'd have to use 1 finger and move it slowly around the shoe, trying to figure out what the shape of the fingers. You can't learn the shape of that object, this totally new shape. The whole point is you're attend to a region and you have to recognize something in that region that you already know. And if you don't recognize the thing in that region, I don't care how many sensor modules are looking at that region. If you can't recognize it, then you have to narrow it down to a smaller region. And you can use multiple modules, multiple learning modules can be attending to the smaller region, but they have to all agree on something. So if my 3 fingers are going to work together, those are the ones that are going to vote. They have to recognize an object that gets passed to up to the top of the hierarchy. If they don't recognize the object, then we don't learn it right. Then we have to then narrow it down to a smaller subset that we do recognize. At some point, you get down to the smallest subset. It's just an edge at some location. You know, that's like, or something like that. So
is RIM, can that be considered an object ID? Or
it could be if it's something you recognized.
Okay.
But if it's something you've learned, I mean, I'm just generically, all we can say is when you're learning a new object, what you're doing is you're finding a child object that you can place within the parent. And if the input to all these columns is not recognized as a known child object, then you have to narrow down the area of attention until you get to a known child object. So I can't say up front whether those 3 fingers are recognizing something or not. But if there are different parts of a mug and I haven't learned the mug yet, I would say that they're not going to work together.
So let's say then they're like, close together, like 3 sensors, just like sensing, okay, like this is, like I recognize this is a mug. The idea like or the way that I understood today's conversation was that, that ID will get passed up eventually to the hippocampus, and the hippocampus will somehow, broadcast all of these back down to all the cortex, not just the fingers that it learned. And since the fingers only learned, it didn't learn any color, even let's say this is all the visual. Let's say the rest are visual. The visual, I mean, they will still learn something because it's coming from the hippocampus, but they don't have any of they only have the morphology of the rim and not the color of the rim. Is that?
This is details that I didn't try to figure out.
Okay.
But clearly you can't learn the color of an object by touching it.
Yeah.
But I can learn the morphology of the object by touching it. So when the hippocampal replays, I don't know what the mechanisms there are and what it's actually replaying. For example, if for example, let's try to come up with a good example. Well, let's say you're learning the mug on the coffee cup, right? And so you're learning it visually. And so then there's a region in the visual space that says, oh, I recognize this whole logo. So that's the attended regions, the entire logo. And so the logo ID gets passed up. And now at some location. And so let's say the logo ID, orientation, and location is known by the hippocampus. Now the hippocampus plays that back. Well, there's no representation for the logo in the somatosensory columns, so they wouldn't even know what to interpret somehow there. I don't know, you know what I'm saying? It's like
Yeah.
There's no model of logos in the somatosensory cortex. So, but we could say there's a logo at this orientation location. They said, well, I don't know what the hell that logo is, but the orientation location makes sense to me. So I can just learn a model. There's an orientation, you know, of course, a logo wouldn't build on part of this model, but the point is that
would it ever work for features? Like, I mean, even if it is also a visual column that knows about logos, its SDR of the logo will be different. So how would you broadcast that?
I'm saying if presumably, I didn't catch all the words, but presumably, you know, the SDR ID is something that can be broadcast, that is some sense shared among, I mean, when we vote, there's a pattern of activation that
But yeah,
in some sense
because that's
can be
after they know
broadcast.
about that object. It does kind of feel like the projection almost needs to be like basic sensory input, kind of like you were saying before, that it would, rather than projecting to V1, it would be projecting like,
what we want to project back is a recognized object, the recognized object at some location.
But if a column doesn't know about that object yet, there's no
Well,
meaningful SDR to activate
right. Well, okay. Some
and be
columns know about
associated
that.
with.
Right. Some
Right.
columns know about that object because actually it's coming a little clearer in my head how this might work. Just sitting here. Some columns, look, at some point the object was recognized. There was a stable pattern in layer 3 or whatever, layer 2, representing that object, and that stable pattern can be reinvoked by the hippocampus, and all the columns that know how to vote on that object would, in theory, know what the object is. If a column did not ever know that object, like there's a touch column that doesn't know what the logo is, then it can't invoke the ID. It just can't do that. It says, I don't recognize this. It's something I've never seen this before. But if we're passing down 3 things, location, orientation, and ID, well, the location and orientation would still work. And so it would just learn that it would learn the morphology of this object, but not know that there was what the particular feature was. I'm not sure if I'm expressing this well.
Yeah, I guess to me it feels like it fits with it. If we are going to get this to work, it makes more sense to try and reawaken the almost like the raw sensory and movement input rather than, because that's the only thing that's universal.
A thing that's universal, the thing that's
Like in order to learn new models in columns that have never.
We don't want to specify the movement, because I don't think that's what we know. We know the region in which the area in which the object was detected,
or location, but I guess
location.
Hippocampus has a model.
Let's say
yeah.
You could specify location, orientation, and feature ID. The location orientation works for everybody. The feature ID only works for people who know what that feature is. But if you do know what that feature is, then you're golden, right?
But yeah, wouldn't the feature have different representations in each column?
Yes and no. Okay, a side thing here. Okay, when we talk about voting, every column has its unique ID, right? And then they send their projections broadly, and people don't associate with them. And I've mentioned this several times, that the projections can be very sparse. That is, I don't have to associate the ID in column 1 with the SDR in column 2, also associated with the SDR in column 3, and so on. As long as you can make you could put it this way: if I looked at all the activity going across all these neurons, and it's very sparse, if I sample from this activity, just even 20, 30 neurons in any set of columns, it doesn't really matter. It could be 1 from every column. It'll still if I sample from that and I get a new SDR, which is those 30 out of million things, that is sufficient to specify the ID for everybody. I know it doesn't sound like it, but I worked this out once. It's like, as long as you just have enough connections to all of them, you're good. 30 connections, and as long as you just randomly distribute them, it'll be
But
good.
wouldn't you have to do it the other way around? Like if you project back, you would just activate one in each
No,
column.
because
that one
because
might be used in different multiple representations.
because I believe the voting mechanism would work. You're essentially, all the columns are trying to reach a consensus, and if you specify individual bits distributed around this region, it'll force it to get to the right consensus. I have to work through it again.
But yeah, is your point, Vivian, that like it's coming from one region, so you don't have a bunch of different places you're sampling from. You only have the one.
But so
And
then
so
it
it
would
kind of
rely
almost needs the
on,
full signature.
Imagine,
basically, you would elicit a partial representation in each column and then use voting to resolve the rest of it.
right. That's how voting works anyway. Right, voting works. I may know my ideas, and I broadcast it, but I could do a very, very sparse broadcasting, and it'll force other people to come to the same conclusion. It's a bit counterintuitive. So imagine this. Imagine
I was just gonna say, because I had a separate question, which was like devil's advocate. Why are dreams so random rather than basically just the sequence of the day?
Well,
Because-
I'm not sure
because
dreams are not necessarily,
or not random, but there's certainly a lot of strange things that happen. But,
I'm not sure dreaming is the recall that we're talking about.
Okay, I thought there was some evidence that it's
It might
like
be.
REM sleep is when the recall happens.
All I know is that,
or the replay.
First of all, these replays occur very rapidly. Remember, they occur extremely much faster than real time. And I don't know if dreams are like that. I mean, I didn't make that assumption. I didn't assume that dreams are the recall that we're talking about. I do know that recall of sequences occurs in the rat hippocampal complex, and it's very rapid, and it's very precise for the exact things that the rat did. It can retrace what the rat did in the maze or something like that. Which I don't know is the same as dreaming, because dreaming seems to be sort of weirdo stuff. So we should look that up.
During REM sleep, where dreams occur in humans, replay events also replay events occur both during slow wave sleep and rapid eye movement. Suggesting a possible role for play cells in dreams. Anyways, the reason I brought it up was because in those computational models I was talking about before, the sort of randomness of dreams has a computational role, which is kind of basically shuffling the sample data and making it more kind of statistically independent. But I was just thinking in your response just now to Vivian about how do you like get back the representation with such sparse inputs, I was thinking that would go wrong a lot. Like you would basically hallucinate a lot, it feels, if all you need is a bit of top-down input and then voting will. And so maybe then it's often just like triggering like a random incorrect object, which is why in dreams suddenly like something will appear out of nowhere that you weren't expecting.
It's not clear to me. You have a lot of errors. You think of the hippocampus as just being one more column that's voting, okay, or a bunch of columns. It's bigger. It's a big structure.
But I guess one column isn't normally enough to trigger everyone else to.
It might be enough to force everyone to reach the same consensus. Let's assume that for the moment. I actually think it is, but assume it for the moment. It's I know it doesn't seem like it, but I can't remember how we worked this out once. But anyway, imagine it's what's going on. I'm the hippocampal complex, and there's a bunch of activity in layer 3 or something, 2 that's being spread all over the cortex. So somewhere, a whole bunch of activity. And I get to sample that, and at any point, and the only thing that's going on in that set of neurons is what's being attended to at that moment. So we're attending to some region. there's some activity on some of these neurons. And what if I'm able to sample from that set of activities? And I'm in the hippocampal complex, and I say, okay, I'm going to remember that that's what the attended object was. It's not, I don't have to look at any, I don't have to do anything else. I just have to just form synapses or turn on synapses that capture a sufficient number of bits in the pattern that was on some sections of the cortex. And so maybe I'm looking at all the cortex. So millions and millions of these bits are coming in, but I'm only going to I'm going to quickly say, okay, here's 30 of them that were active. I'm going to remember that as the ID. Now later, I'm going to play that back. It's the same ID. My argument, that is sufficient to force those other columns to reach the right conclusion. I can't prove it to you right now, but I worked it out to convince myself that it worked.
Yeah, okay.
Maybe Subutai would remember how we did that. Maybe, I don't know. I could work on it again if you want. I could try to figure it. I had some good arguments for it. It was a surprising conclusion. It's like, yeah, this, because voting kind of requires this. Voting means if I have millions of columns, I can't be sending connections to millions of columns, or not millions of columns. If I have 1,000 columns that are active, I can't be trying to activate every one of them. All I could do is send out a broad sort of broadcast of what my neurons are active, and it'll randomly associate with some other neurons that are active elsewhere. And it's the collective effect it's important. It's not any individual column. Yeah, collectively, they're going to settle. So we can take that for the moment as a working assumption. So I think it would work. I know it's just all the stuff is amazingly complex.
Yeah, but then if it's the voting that settles it to an object ID, are you saying then that would be the input to the next column, and that's the one that's learning?
No,
because if you just get the kind of object ID re-invoked, that doesn't really help you learn more about that object.
No, well, you remember, we're going to send back, we're also going to broadcast the location and the orientation, right? So we were just focusing on the object ID because Scott brought up the issue about, we talked about not everybody knows the object ID. So
is this the ID of the incoming feature at that location? Or
right. Whatever feature was determined at the attended to location, attended to region. So we attended to a region. The neurons are restricted to anybody who is getting input from that region gets to vote, and they reach the consensus of what's in that region. That consensus is then stored in the hippocampus. The hippocampus can play it back later, saying to everybody, not just the regions, not just the people who observed it, to all the columns, I observed this, we observed this ID, this object ID. Some columns will be able to recognize it, some won't. But it'll be a lot more than the ones that actually sensed it to begin with. I hope this is not super confusing.
Yeah, I guess I'm getting a bit confused with we're sending back the object ID, which would go to layer 4, but then also resolving it through voting, which would be happening in layer 4.
I didn't say it goes to layer 4. No.
If we're using this to kind of learn models.
I guess you're saying, yeah, it would be, well, let's work out the details. Okay. So it would invoke, the feedback wouldn't go directly to the phone. It would go to the regions that are able to recognize this object. So these would be, and so then those regions would then project to layer 4 in the next hierarchically higher region. So that's where training would occur. So I'm invoking the features in some columns, and then we're going to try to learn the arrangement of those features in the next region up, right?
Okay, yeah.
Right, you wouldn't, so.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Think again, there's the boundary of knowledge, right? The boundary of knowledge is that you're going from the bottom of the cortex you're recognizing compositional structure, and at some point, the compositional structure is no longer recognized. It's like there are features that I recognize, but now the arrangement of them is not recognized. So at that point, to train, I want to invoke the features at the child regions.
Yeah.
And I want to invoke the locations at the parent region. And I haven't thought about how to do that.
Yeah.
But, right. So
Yeah.
you wouldn't be projecting the layer 4. You'd be projecting someplace up, probably layer 1, someplace. So you'd be invoking the correct model ID. Yeah, you'd be invoking to layer 1, that's then to layer 3 or 2, and then you'd invoke the correct model ID. I know it just all seems kind of crazily complicated, but I can't reach any other conclusion. And in some sense, it fits a lot of data that we know. So I'm reasonably confident of the basic ideas. So now just thinking through it here, I can see how the ID would work pretty clearly. I don't know how you would transmit a region of interest or a location. I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you transmit or broadcast the.
Yeah, I mean, one way, I'm not saying this is how it's done, but I guess one way it could be done, I guess, is if you reactivate the sensory input, and that just gets filtered through whatever sensory processing exists and gives you the kind of orientation of the lower level input, and then
Go ahead.
Yeah, and then have a movement, and although it's locations that are stored in the hippocampus, whatever movement takes place as it moves from one of those locations to another is transferred as movement to the columns. And so basically, as far as they're concerned, it's like they are just awake and sensing, and that would at least fit with the phenomenological experience of dreaming, which is like you feel like you're just moving around in sort of a virtual world. It doesn't feel like you're just getting like flashes of what you have seen when awake. It's like you're actually moving and kind of your sensory motor still.
I'm at least a stake of point of contention here. I think we should separate dreaming out from
Okay.
the mechanism I talked about, because I don't think this replay mechanism is dreaming. It is a precise recall of experiences of an animal, and it happens really, really quickly. By Vivian.
Yeah, sorry.
It happens really, really quickly. So let's not conflate dreaming with this, because maybe it has nothing to do with it. I don't like the idea of trying to go back to fooling the column to think it's actually moving and being of movement data. That's really problematic, because I'm trying to, every column, if it somehow, that's a detail that can't be transmitted from the hippocampus. It doesn't know, the hippocampus doesn't know how things moved. And it just says, hey, at some location, I observed this. And then, and later, another location, I observed this. And it just seems like we're trying to get away from representing the movement. We're just trying to say, I'd rather say, somehow you have to, I'm going to tell you a location in space. I don't know.
It's kind of weird because like normally we don't communicate location directly to columns unless it's unless there's a learned association, because it's always in its own reference frame.
All right, so I don't know how it works. Okay, I'll just admit I don't know how it works. I don't think the solution is going to be converting into movements. I don't think so.
And just like a virtual world.
It's going to be, I don't think so. Again, remember, we're talking about like, recalling movements of your finger over an object, or, recalling, it's not like dreamlike things necessarily. They could be, I'm at the intersection, I look at and see different cars and stuff, but a lot of what we learn, like the logo on the mug is, anyway, that's the dream thing, put that aside. It seems to me that what you wanted to transmit is a language that can be understood by every column, right? And what the column needs to know is, there's two things to learn. For the cortex to learn, you have to have child columns need to learn invoke the idea of the child object. I think I have a good sense of how that happens. And then the location information, it has to somehow be invoked into the parent columns language. And I don't know how to do that, but I bet we can think of a way of doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like that would be an interesting kind
right.
of follow-up exercises to try and think through some of these details.
Right.
Maybe-
In fact, I think
Yeah.
in my notes I said, lots of questions and I didn't understand it.